What is up, guys? It's your boy Rick Kakis, and this week we had some massive Destiny 2 news because Bungie unveiled the upcoming buffs and nerfs to weapons, exotics, perks, and more that are arriving in the mid-season update scheduled for March 5th. And if you want to know about every single one of those changes, I have done a video linked right up above. But in this video, we're going to be investing in some Destiny 2 stonks, okay? Talking about the weapons that are the big winners of this update. Weapons that, thanks to buffs, are likely to climb dramatically within the meta. So if you haven't acquired these yet, absolutely go out and try to get them, take them out of your vault, infuse them, craft them, whatever you need to do, because again, these are likely to get a lot better starting with this update. So, first off, let's talk about heavy grenade launchers. These have actually gotten buffed a few times over the past couple of seasons, and they've started to make their way into the PvE DPS meta with certain strategies. Now, overall, they're getting another buff, but this also contains a nerf, so what the heck is going on? Well, essentially, they are nerfing spike grenades. This was like an absolutely mandatory perk for a PvE role, and Bungie didn't want it to be so mandatory, so yeah, spike grenades is getting a nerf. However, to compensate for that, overall, they've increased the direct hit damage by grenade launchers by 10%, and they've increased the detonation damage by 5%. Doesn't apply to PvP. So, overall, what this means is that if you have a god roll with spike grenades, it's going to do a tiny bit less damage than it did before. However, if you don't have a spike grenades roll, it's significantly better. And then, also guys, they've increased the reserve ammo by a minimum of 6 rounds and a maximum of 10 rounds. So even if you have a spike grenades god roll that got like 2% less damage, you got minimum 6 extra rounds, which will more than make up for that slight loss of damage in terms of overall DPS, like in a long DPS phase. So I think still overall, this is quite the buff. Again, 6 more rounds at a minimum for every heavy grenade launcher is absolutely huge, guys. And let's take a look at some of those grenade launchers most impacted. And the first one I've got to point out here is the Prospector Exotic Grenade Launcher, guys. This is the only 165 rounds per minute GL left in the game, and it doesn't have spike grenades. It will actually set targets on fire for damage over time. Like, the overall damage output for the Prospector is actually super impressive, guys. But yeah, like, if this thing is just going to be getting 10% more impact damage and 5% more detonation damage and more reserve ammo, it's the fastest shooting grenade launcher in the entire game, having 6 or to 10 more rounds for the Prospector. This thing could actually be yeeting out damage. And another thing I want to point out here is something that's going to impact really like all of us, and it's an example with this interference grenade launcher right here. So this is what is traditionally a very good roll. We've got spike grenades, we've got auto-loading holster, and we have full court for some more damage. But because spike grenades got a bit of a nerf, right? Because it's not so mandatory anymore, what about this? What about switching to augmented drum? I mean, look at the stats. If I do that, I now go up to 7 rounds. Well, previously it was 5. So if I'm only losing out on like 2% damage by switching to augmented drum, but I get 2 more rounds in the magazine, that's probably worth it now. Like before, because spike grenades was like such a mandatory perk, you know, I was still running spike grenades, but now you have to take a look at all of these other magazine perks, and the best example is augmented drum here, increasing that magazine size. This could become way more viable after this change, and with more reserve ammo, you know, that's just going to mean more ammo yeeted out like faster because, you know, you have those bigger magazine sizes. So absolutely something to keep an eye out for. And one more example here, guys, is with something like the Love and Death here. So perks like Field Prep, all right? Before we had auto-loading holster. That's a very good perk. But you may want to start to transition towards perks like Field Prep that will let you reload faster, because of those increased reserves. Like, you're gonna have so much more ammo to shoot out. You're gonna have an entire extra magazine in a DPS phase. You may start to value perks that will let you reload faster just so that you can get out all of your ammo within that damage phase, right? So again, definitely I would expect to see some grenade launchers with maybe some alternative roles start to see more play within the PvE DPS meta here, guys. But speaking of grenade launchers, heavy wave frame grenade launchers are getting a massive buff. Their damage is just being increased by 20%, and then the wave width, so the ad clearing potential, is improving by 40%. And really, the one that's going to impact here is going to be the craftable Neomuna grenade launcher. And I mean, hey, you can have Envious Assassin plus Chain Reaction, you know, the Forbearance roll on a heavy that is now getting a significant buff. Yeah, this could be like an ad clearing god. Now, how much will this see play? I don't really know, but certainly maybe worth, you know, getting that pattern crafted, because again, these are pretty big buffs we're talking about. Now, continuing with the PvE DPS meta here, guys, everyone knows that it's a rocket DPS meta mainly using Galahorn. Well, we actually have some big changes that impact that. So, two different archetypes of rocket launchers that aren't seeing a ton of play in terms of DPS are getting buffs. So with precision frames, they've increased the reserve ammo by 2 and reduced the damage penalty from -10 to -5. So basically, that means 2 more ammo in reserves and 5% more damage after this update. And hey, a great example of something that becomes a lot more viable is the Royal Entry. This has been a Vanguard weapon for quite a while now, and when you level up Vanguard, you can get what you see here, which is multiple perks. And I mean, look at this roll here. Impact Casing, then Field Prep, then Clown Cartridge. That's a very good rocket launcher roll right there, but it's precision frame, so no one really used this thing. But hey, 2 more rounds and 5% more damage, these become a lot more viable. I don't think they're going to be getting play in like raid boss DPS phases where your damage needs to be absolutely on point, but if you're running these in other activities, Nightfall strikes and so on, having that built-in tracking is definitely nice. Like, these are just getting outright better, right? Now, the other archetype getting better is high impact frame rockets. So again, increase reserve ammo by 2, and it now deals more detonation damage and less impact damage for roughly the same total damage. And this is going to make them better against groups of enemies. And a great example of that is the Braytech Osprey rocket launcher. I don't have the best roll here, you know, Envious Assassin plus Bipod. Apparently I'm going to be yeeting out like 8 rounds before having to reload. But aside from that, like, this is still in the Nightfall loot pool. You can still get the Adept version even this season. And it is a high impact frame, so this just became quite a lot more valuable, especially if you are using it like for both DPS, like you're using it for Nightfall, for example, DPS obviously at the boss, but for the rest of the Nightfall, you are very interested in doing some ad clearing with this thing. I mean, the high impact frames are now going to be a lot better for that, and 2 extra rounds is absolutely a big deal. Like, that will make a big difference in a longer DPS phase and just making a weapon more viable, guys. Now, importantly, the above changes also affect Deathbringer, Galahorn, and Truth, right? So, I think what this is saying is that Galahorn here is a tracking rocket. Like, I think it's just built in as a 15 rounds per minute precision frame rocket, or even if it's not, if it's a high impact with tracking, I mean, it does have a massive blast radius here, guys. I think they're saying the Galahorn gets 2 more rounds in reserves, which is insane. I mean, you're using a Galahorn 100% of the time when you rocket launcher DPSing. Now the Galahorn guy has 2 extra rounds. Again, overall, especially if you're doing other activities where you're using the Galahorn throughout the whole activity, like, this will make a big difference here, guys. But moving on from there, when you think of PvE DPS phase, you definitely don't think of caster frame swords, right? But they are getting a buff as well. So, they've reduced the heavy attack energy cost from 5 to 4, and also they've increased the heavy attack damage by 16%. So if you have something here, like this is a very old Temptations hook caster frame, right? But this has Relentless plus Whirlwind Blade, like the sword DPS roll right here. So overall, hey, you're now going to be able to use your heavy attack more often, like maybe squeeze, 1 or 2 more heavy attacks out in a longer DPS phase before you run out of ammo, and every single one of those is doing 16% more damage. That is not nothing. However, I still think these have a long way to go if they're going to compete in any way in terms of like DPS wise with other swords. The place where they could start to see play potentially is like if you have anti-champion sword rounds in a future season, and obviously if you use a caster frame you can shoot a sword damage at a champion and stun them from a long ways away, which could matter, but we're getting pretty niche here, but again, it's important to know about. Now moving on to the exotic weapons getting some big buffs, the first one is actually the Edge of Action, which is the Titan exclusive exotic glaive. So this thing can actually make like a mini Titan bubble, and that is what is getting buffed. So they've increased the damage resistance in PvE against all combatants except bosses up to 85%, and increased its damage resistance against bosses to 15%. So the bubble is just going to be a lot more survivable. Next up, we have the Manticore submachine gun, and there's a lot of changes here, but the big buffs, guys, are first of all, while anti-grav thrusters are engaged, combatants will be less accurate when targeting the player, similar to the always on time Sparrow, so enemies will just hit you less. And also, with the Catalyst, final blows and sustained damage with the Manticore while airborne will grant a Void Overshield and return ammo to the magazine. You're already getting a built-in damage increase when you're doing the airborne stuff with the Manticore. So hey, it's a Void SMG here with all those things combined. I love to run a Hunter with a Gear Falcons build so I can go invisible and I get constant volatile rounds. So now I'm getting volatile rounds, while airborne, enemies are missing me. I'm doing extra damage from the Manticore and it's auto reloading the magazine and giving me a Void Overshield? That seems actually pretty decent. Again, definitely a weapon I'm going to try out when this update goes live. And another exotic weapon getting a big buff here is actually the X-Dirus, which I again like to use on my Hunter. So the X-Dirus, very, very unique grenade launcher. So what they're doing is that they've increased the impact damage against PvE enemies by 50%. So you get a direct impact, you're hitting way harder, and also they've increased the maximum rate of fire by 17%. So it has the potential to hit a lot harder and shoot a lot quicker, so your overall damage output is going to be significantly improved. Again, I like running this thing with the Catalyst. It automatically makes you amplified for every single final blow, like literally one of the easiest ways to get amplified in the entire game. And guys, if you actually for the Hunter specifically have the exotic gauntlets, the Mothkeeper's wraps, these are going to make it so that every single time you trigger the Loyal Moth's trait on the X-Dirus, where you would create a blinding moth, you actually also spawn a moth that gives you a Void Overshield every single time you trigger that. So you're just going, you're killing enemies, and like once every 3 enemies, because it has a bit of an internal cooldown, but like very, very often, it's spawning a moth that will go and seek and blind enemies, and a moth that will come to you and give you an overshield. That's pretty darn decent. But moving on from there, we have the buffs to weapon perks, and the big ones are firstly, Heal Clip. So right now, these give you Cure ×1, and with the buff, they're going to give you Cure ×2, which is just a much bigger chunk of initial healing. So you're going to heal a lot more from Heal Clip. So definitely, something to keep your eye on. Now, another one getting a very interesting buff is the Dual Loader perk. Now, funny enough, this Xenoclast is the only weapon on my entire account that has Dual Loader, and the only reason it does is because it's an alt perk, and I was keeping it for lead from gold, because Dual Loader was so bad, because it would tank, as you can see, your reload speed. So the change is that they've completely removed the reload speed penalty. So you just load 2 shells at a time with no penalty to reload speed. So it's just going to double your reload speed, which is actually kind of insane. Like, would it be worth it, for example, on this roll, switching from lead from gold to dual loader just to reload so much faster? Like in a DPS phase that can matter. So I don't think it's going to massively change what a DPS shotgun looks like, because we're talking about stuff like the heritage with reconstruction focus fury. When we're talking about a DPS shotgun, like that is so far ahead of anything that dual loader can do. But again, big increase in value to dual loader. It just got a significant buff. And so guys, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That is linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.